take a deep breath, take the higher road. That's what they always say, as if they know the way. They won't take it from me. But don't ever doubt yourself, 'cause life ain't just a dream. You make your own, so kick and scream. The people will act with a never-ending force. You never had the chance, so what you waiting for? The day has come, my friend, 'cause this is war. It's time and this is war.
Today we are going to delve into a topic that is both heart-wrenching and profoundly inspiring. The idea that hope never dies, even when faced with the darkest of trials. As we recount the experiences of patients who are hospitalized during the tumultuous times of the COVID pandemic, it's crucial to recognize the unyielding spirit of those who faced insurmountable odds. Beginning in the spring of 2020, our already broken healthcare system was pushed to its limits. Patients found themselves in the throes of not only battling a fierce and unknown virus, but also navigating the consequences of deadly protocols, medical mismanagement, and malfeasance. The stories of those days are filled with moments of despair, yet they are also illuminated by the indomitable will of the human spirit to overcome. In hospitals around the globe, amidst the fear and uncertainty, there was something that remained unbroken: the hope and relentless determination of patients and healthcare providers alike. Despite being subjected to protocols that were rapidly developed and often changed, many based on trial and error, the courage displayed by these individuals reminds us of the resilience embedded deep within us all. It's important to discuss and acknowledge the errors and the learnings from these unprecedented crimes against humanity. The missteps in management, the hurried decisions, and the protocols that were not in the best interest of patients. These were all part of a larger struggle to save lives in the face of a relentless and unseen enemy. 4 years later, it is important that we not dwell solely on what went wrong, but also shine a light on the hope that persisted through every challenge. As we reflect on these experiences, we see the power of hope and the strength it gives us to persevere. We honor the resilience of those who, against all odds, clung to hope, and in doing so, inspired countless others to do the same. Today, we can discuss, learn, and move forward, fueled by the unwavering spirit of hope that, despite everything, never dies. You're listening to Nurses Out Loud on America Out Loud Talk Radio. I'm your host, Nurse Kimberly Overton. Before we get started today, I do want to encourage our listeners, if you have questions or comments, or perhaps you want to share your own experiences with what you're seeing on the front lines of healthcare, you can now submit those to us by emailing them directly to nurses@americaoutloud.com. We would love to hear from you. We encourage all of you to engage in the battle and find your voice in this fight. But until you are able to do that, we will continue to be that voice for you. Joining me today is Craig Andrews, a U.S. Marine turned electrical engineer and mobile phone designer, turned marketer and multi-best-selling author. He's driven over $500 million in revenue during his career. In 2009, Craig launched his own company, which became Allies for Me. In August 2021, Craig began 3 months in the hospital and 6 weeks in a coma when he nearly died. During that time, Craig's team ran Allies for Me without him. Now Craig shares lessons from the ledge of death and how they apply to both marketing and life. Craig, thank you so much for joining me today.
Kimberly, I've been looking forward to this more than I can say.
I have too. We were introduced by Neer Patel, who was my guest on a recent episode of Nurses Out Loud. And when I got your email and started to hear your story, it really resonated with me because, as many of my listeners know, I spent the entire pandemic in the ICU caring for COVID patients. And when I started to hear your story, it just reminded me so much of stories, my experiences over and over again that I was seeing in the ICU. And I really want to impart, and I know I said this in my email to you, Craig, that you are so lucky to have survived I can recall only two of my patients that made it out, only two that made it off of the ventilator and survived. Their quality of life is very poor. So to have you joining me today and to be able to share your experience is incredible. But I want to kind of give you the floor and let you just give me a little bit of background information on, your business and how you ended up in the hospital and what that experience was like for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that you were saying, it resonated with me. It was the reason my wife and I wrote the book together. And there are so many people that have been touched horribly by this disease, and they're left to kind of pick up the scraps and to try and make meaning of it. And one of the things I think people don't understand is I think anybody that touched it, anybody that was up close, has some level of guilt. And they're wrestling with that. And that's really why we wrote the book was we started meeting these people and they would say, well, you guys are the lucky ones. Somebody told my wife, your husband lived. And yeah, but she wrestles with guilt. I wrestle with guilt, survivor's guilt. And it's just so heinous that so many people were hurt so much to wrestle with guilt they should have never had to wrestle with. All of this could have been avoided.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have my fair share of guilt. I can remember in the very, very early days of the pandemic when we really didn't know what was happening. We just knew that these patients were presenting very differently than anything that we had experienced before. And despite all of our best efforts, they were not getting any better. They were just all declining and would ultimately lead to their ultimate demise. And it was heartbreaking to be a part of. And it took, I don't want to say that in the very, very beginning, that I knew, right off the bat that something was completely wrong or that anything nefarious was going on. So I think back on those days when we were following these protocols, and I have a fair amount of guilt for that because I saw all of these patients die.
Yeah.
But at some point, I started asking questions because it just didn't make sense. Were you given remdesivir, correct? When you were inpatient?
August 10th, 2021. I remember the consultation. It was about 9:00 at night. Doctor walked in my room and he said, he actually gave me steroids. And he said, well, we have this other drug called remdesivir. And there were three things that he most certainly did not tell me on August 10th when he started me on that protocol. The first thing he didn't tell me was that multiple studies had shown that remdesivir was ineffective for the treatment of COVID. And even the World Health Organization 10 months earlier had said, don't give remdesivir, it doesn't work. That was the first thing he didn't tell me. The second thing he didn't tell me was that I was imperiling my kidneys by taking remdesivir. And the third thing he didn't tell me was that on that day, August 10th, 2021, remdesivir was one of 3 drugs listed on cms.gov where the government would give him a 20% bonus for prescribing that drug. And within 10 days of my final dose, I was in kidney failure and on dialysis.
That's what I was seeing over and over again. And I had to ask the question, like you had just mentioned, that the WHO had done these massive global studies that showed remdesivir had little to no impact on hospitalized patients. And my question was, why are we using it? Number one, because all we're doing is we're shutting people's organs down. For what reason? It's not going to be effective because by the time that you're getting into the ER or to the ICU and you're getting to us, you are well past your replication phase. You're into your symptomatic phase at this point, and that is going to render an antiviral medication completely useless. So I started asking all of the doctors, I'm like, why do we continue to use this medication? It is clearly doing more harm than good. And my bigger question was, why is the government financially incentivizing its use? And I never got an answer.
Isn't that crazy? If there were a drug that would save lives, Do you really have to bribe the doctors to give it?
Exactly. Exactly. And that was part of my reasoning for, I walked away from my career as a bedside ICU nurse because we were harming people. We weren't helping anyone. We were harming people. And I bet that the other thing that he didn't tell you was that, did he tell you that this drug was under an emergency authorization use?
No. I mean, the entirety of my informed consent was, hey, there's this drug remdesivir. It's the only drug we have to treat COVID. Do you want it? That was my informed consent.
Right. And I know the other thing that they weren't telling people was that, because if you go back to the Ebola trials of 2008, and if they had led with the information that 54% of those study participants died, I don't know how many people would have signed on the dotted line for it.
Yeah, it's if he had told me, hey, Craig, you're putting your kidneys at risk, and he'd given me those stats,
Yeah.
I would have said, no way. Let's just keep plugging. So I went into the hospital on August 10th. My wife and I both woke up sick on July 31st, 2021. And, 11 days later, she was starting to get better. My O2 was headed to the basement. The Sunday, the August 9th, my O2 was in the 80s and she was getting very concerned. And I said, well, let's give it a little bit of time. Let's see what happens. And then I usually wake up before her. And the next morning I woke up and I checked my O2 with a pulse ox and it was in the 70s. And I realized by the time she woke up, she would demand that I go to the doctor. And went to the doctor. They chastised me. They didn't say anything about monoclonal antibodies. They just chastised me for going to them. How bizarre that the doctor chastises you for going to them when you're sick instead of saying, "Oh my goodness, let's get you to the right place. This is beyond us." And so then I walked in and my wife dropped me off at the door and I walked into the emergency room. And at that point, I had to take multiple breaths just to say, I'm having trouble breathing. And they immediately took me back, put me behind a curtain, and got me on oxygen. And a couple minutes later, I heard my wife, frantically on the other side of the curtain saying, "Where's my husband? I want to see my husband." They're like, "Ma'am, you need to leave. You need to go back out in the car." Well, we live in Texas. This was August. They sent her out to the car in Texas in August for 3 hours.
That's one of the worst parts of what they did was that they took the advocate away. And I say this all the time, that I feel like as nurses, that moment that they told our patients that they couldn't have an advocate at their side was when we should have demanded and said, this is absolutely ridiculous. And we should have put a stop to that. Unfortunately, we didn't. And
Well,
we saw so many people suffer because of that.
well, unfortunately, so it was 10 days. It was actually 11 days that I was in the hospital. On the 11th day, they upgraded me to the IMC from a regular room. And my wife kept texting me, "Hey, do you want me to come in and rattle cages?" That's my word, not hers. But basically, I feel like I need to come in and fight for you. And, it was wild. I was scared. I said, no, if you do that, it's going to change the treatment I get. Yeah. Because I could tell they were kind of upset that I was there. And so on the 11th day, I'd been fighting for 11 days successfully to keep my oxygen above 86%. And when it would drop, I would do breathing exercises to bring it back up. If I couldn't bring it up, I would get on my stomach until it came back up and then eventually work my way back onto my back. And on the 11th day, they upgraded me to the IMC and they put me on a 30-liter cannula. I think it was 30 liters plus a mask. That was 15 liters. And they say, "Hey, we're going to give you something that's going to help you sleep." I was like, "Oh, that's great," because sleep has sucked. Well, it turned out the thing that was going to help me sleep was an armful of morphine. And
which suppresses your respiration.
Yeah. Yeah. And then they call my wife in the middle of the night. They wake her up at 12:30 in the morning. And she hears me screaming in the background, no ventilator, no ventilator. And they're saying, Mrs. Andrews, you need to put your husband on the ventilator. And she says, well, he doesn't want to go. And they laugh and they said, well, if he doesn't go on the ventilator, he'll be dead in 24 hours. And so they bullied her in the middle of the night to put me on the ventilator. But tying this back to your thing about keeping the caregiver or the family out, she went back and she said, if he's going to die, he's not going to die alone. I am going to visit. And she basically bullied her way into the hospital. They gave her 1 hour a day to come visit me. And I think that played a role in my survival.
I bet it did, because not many people were afforded the opportunity to have their family come in. So that was amazing that she was able to do that. What really bothered me about that was that they were telling people that they could not come in and be with their loved ones who were in just absolute critical condition. But as soon as the family would agree to put those patients on comfort measures because the death was imminent, they then allowed the family to come up to say their goodbyes. And
Yeah.
that was so disturbing to me. I'm like, if they can come up for that, why can't they come up and be with their family members? Because it does play such a crucial role. The isolation was horrible. It was just horrific what they were doing to patients. And even with the nurses, we're not really going into the rooms. They were encouraging us as nurses to cluster our care, to go in very quickly, get all your stuff done at once and leave and not go back into that room. Go in there as little as possible. They were even suggesting that we pull the IV poles and the IV, the monitors and all of that out of the room so that we didn't have to go in to make adjustments to those pumps.
I saw that in your interview, and that just shocks me.
Yeah, I didn't do it. I didn't care. I didn't do it. I stayed with my patients. The idea that, that was going to somehow lessen our exposure, we've already been exposed at that point. So it really didn't matter. I mean, take care of your patients. I spent most of my 12-hour shifts in the rooms with my patient because I was not going to let them sit in there alone and fearful. So I didn't listen, but too many of the nurses did listen because it was what they called, protocol and the procedures, and they're too afraid to buck the system, I guess. And that was unfortunate because all of these patients were having these feelings of isolation. And when are feeling isolated, patients are feeling isolated, lonely, depressed, their immune system takes a hit. So that
I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
One of the things that happened when they put me in the ICU on the ventilator, Karen, my wife, said, well, can you give him a bath? And they're like, of course we'll give him a bath. She said, he hasn't had a bath since he's been in the hospital. So I would text her. I said, hey, I need some baby wipes. And she's like, why? I said, because I'm dirty. And so for my first 11 days in the hospital, I'm sitting in bed all, with a, 15-liter cannula and a 15-liter mask, can't move away from the bed. And I'm sitting there using baby wipes that my wife supplied me just to keep myself clean. They didn't even come in and clean me.
Yeah, that's so disturbing. And I saw a fair amount of that happening. And to me, there's no excuse for that. We should be in there and we should be caring for patients. And I was lucky we had a really good team where I was, and we made sure that we were always keeping, our patients, we kept them as clean and as comfortable as possible. But I've heard such horror stories about how these nurses and the aides, even the doctors, were too afraid to come on the floor. The doctors were taking report from the nurses and, doing their notes without ever coming up, putting their stethoscope on these patients.
Yeah. I read that in your interview, and I was trying to remember if the doctor came in and checked my lungs. I have a fuzzy memory on that. I feel like a couple times, maybe not a lot. So in my book, I talk about Droopy the doctor. And I say if Droopy the dog was a doctor, he would look exactly like this man. And he was this doctor for the first 10 days. He wasn't there all those 10 days, but he'd come in and he would just look at me so sad. And I just thought, well, this is a depressed man. And then I later realized, oh no, he thought he was looking at a dying man.
Yeah. They didn't
Nope.
expect you to survive. I can promise you that. They did not expect you to survive. And that's why I talk about in my interview that you just referred to, that's the interview in the book, What the Nurses Saw. I talk about the fact that it was definitely the most egregious thing I'd ever seen in my nearly 30-year career in healthcare, was that they were placing patients on ventilators that weren't in respiratory distress. They were not in respiratory failure. They were doing it in an attempt to contain the virus, because once you're on that ventilator, it's a closed loop system. The virus was no longer being disseminated into the air. Well, that's not about the patient in the bed. And we did this. I say we, I mean they, because I didn't have any part in that. They did this knowing that approximately 80% of those patients that were placed on ventilators never made it off. So they were in effect signing the death warrant when they would place these patients on ventilators. It should never have been used unless it was an absolute last resort.
Well, and here's one of my last memories before I went on the ventilator, before they shot me full of morphine that night. And this is how it reads in the book. I said the doctor stopped by for a brief chastisement. Not Droopy the doctor. This guy was more like a schoolmarm with an exceptionally high opinion of himself. And his schoolmarm duties today were to inform me of my sins and how bad things come to those who sin. As I've reflected on that conversation, I realized he believed I would die in the next few days. So his priority was to make his last words to a dying man a chastisement.
Yeah, we saw that over and over again. And that's what doctors were doing, particularly for patients that would come in who were unvaccinated. They were made to feel like they were there because they didn't get the vaccine, which was absolutely not true. But that's what they would do. And they would really gaslight these patients and, let them know, well, if you had just gotten the vaccine, you wouldn't be in this situation. We shouldn't even be caring for you. You're taking up a bed for somebody who could, who did the right thing in their quote unquote right thing. But the interesting thing is that the majority of the patients we were seeing in those hospitals were vaccinated.
Yeah. And yes, I heard that. So I wasn't vaccinated, and those were my sins. And
Yeah.
he made it very clear. You're
They
here
did. Yeah.
because of your sins. And you know what's so sad? I mean, if we fast forward several months ahead to after I got out of the hospital, I had one of the most horrible. I mean, and there's a contest here for which doctor had the most horrible discussion with me, and they're really competitive. But this was my primary care doctor of at that point about 17 years. And I was in for a physical about 6 weeks after I got out of the hospital. And just for the sake of your listeners, when I left the hospital, I left in a wheelchair. My body had completely atrophied. And my third hospital was a rehab hospital. I left that being able to walk short distances with a walker on a ton of oxygen. 6 liters of oxygen in motion was what I needed at the time. And I'm sitting there in a wheelchair in my doctor's office, and he kind of pops in. He's like, "Huh, yeah, we saw that you went in the hospital, and then we saw that you left. We just figured you died." And then he went on to chastise me about the vaccine. He's like, "So, are you finally going to get vaccinated?" Well, I was skin and bones at that time. Even if I wanted to get vaccinated, I was in no physical shape to sustain that vaccine. And my goal was not to pick a fight with him. I was shocked that I was still alive. And I told him, I said, I've had a lot of time to think about this. And if I could turn back the clock and make different choices based on what I know today, the biggest choice I would have made was I would have started on therapeutics.
Yeah.
And he scoffed and he's like, "What therapeutics?" I said, "Well, let's start with monoclonal antibodies." And he kind of paused. He was like, "Yeah, those were available in August." And I said, "Yeah." And I went to one of your offices. I couldn't meet with him because he just wasn't available that day. I said, "I went to one of your offices," and they said absolutely nothing about monoclonal antibodies. And his response was, "Well, it was a shit show back then."
Hmm.
I'm like, "We're talking about people's lives."
Yeah.
And I said, "Secondly, if I could, I would have taken ivermectin." And he scoffed some more. And he's like, "Oh, that's unproven. I've read blah, 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 blah." And I sat down and I actually explained to him the mechanism which ivermectin works, because like I said, I had a lot of time to think about it. And I was like, well, I said, as I understand it, what happens is the protease comes in and it docks with the protein and splits the protein. And my understanding is ivermectin will coat the protease so it can never dock, and it will also coat the docking area on the protein so it can't dock, so there's no viral replication. And he wasn't expecting an informed patient. And he looked at me, I'm not kidding. He looked at me and he said, well, do you know the chemical compound for ivermectin? I'm like, no. He's like, well, I do. And I'm sitting there thinking, I don't know the chemical compound for sugar, but I know it will make you fat.
Right, exactly.
And next thing I know, he disappears. And then he comes back with like these photos of, I think, mumps patients. And he's like just shaking them in my face. My wife is almost in tears. And I'm sitting there thinking, dude, I'm one of the few survivors who made it off the ventilator. And this is how you're choosing to use your time with me?
Yeah. It's unfortunate, but like these doctors are too far gone. I'm telling you, I don't know if it's just the indoctrination. Like with pediatricians, we all know that they're financially incentivized to push vaccines on children and compliance with the CDC schedule. So those doctors are a lost cause. But none of these doctors even know, they don't do their own independent research. I've been doing this for nearly 30 years. I've worked with doctors the entire time. I don't know many at all that do. There are probably a few, but very, very few and far between that they do their own independent research. They really just take whatever is handed down from the CDC, the FDA, and they just run with it because the indoctrination is so deep. I think they're kind of a lost cause. It's really unfortunate. I fired every one of my doctors because I didn't get vaccinated and I wasn't going to get vaccinated. And when they refused my medical exemptions, I told them, well, if that means that I have to give up my career as a nurse, I will. And I fired every one of them because not a single one of them could tell me why I should take a shot that doesn't prevent transmission and is absolutely all risk and no benefit. And the only thing that they would tell me, it was like it was a scripted answer. And I'm sure that this is what they get from the CDC or whoever the powers that be are. They said, I just feel like the vaccine is the only way out of this. That's what every one of them told me.
Well, and the problem is, at least from my perspective, is even going back to the original vaccine, there's not a doctor today that can give proper informed consent. Because we know from Pfizer's own data that 1,200, I think 23 people died from the vaccine in the first quarter of 2021. And that's what came out after, rigorous court battles to release the data, but they redacted the denominator. We don't know 1,200 people out of how many. The denominator is still redacted. And so based on that, I don't know how any doctor can give informed consent about that vaccine.
They cannot. Informed consent doesn't exist because we don't even know what's in it. We didn't know what was in it. We didn't know anything about it. So how can we as healthcare professionals give and provide informed consent when we ourselves are not informed? We can't. It's absolutely impossible. And we did not have the data. And that's why, I ended up resigning my position entirely when I was working as a telephone triage nurse. And they wanted me to encourage the shot for children, but they also wanted me to say that the shot was safe and effective, period. And that there'd be no way that I could make that statement because we just didn't have the data at that point. We had no long-term safety data, and the short-term data was very alarming at that point. I don't remember how many you said had died. I used to have these numbers memorized. I don't anymore. But the short-term data we were seeing was alarming. And as far as injuries and deaths related to the vaccine, yet they were wanting me to make a bold statement like it is safe and effective, period. That's not informed consent.
Well, and one of my saddest moments was when I was still with that doctor. So that day I made the decision I was going to change doctors. I decided to keep 1 year of continuity. I was primarily meeting with his PA, which ended up being a mistake. But she was very nice and she intended good. But when you're one of the rare few individuals that survived the ventilator, you need more than you need. I discovered that I needed somebody that was a little bit more knowledgeable, that didn't think about me in some sort of cutout as, okay, 9 out of 10 patients that exhibit this should, need this. My body's weird. It is to this day because of this. But I was in there getting ready to meet with my PA, and a tech comes in. She's some, young, cute, 20-year-old young lady. And she starts telling me that she has a tachycardia because they forced her to get the vaccine. She's 20 years old and she has a cardiologist. And I just thought, oh my goodness, I'm oldish. I don't have my whole life in front of me. And this poor young lady had her life ruined because some people crossed some ethical boundaries they never should have crossed.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we've seen millions of reported injuries, and so many have died as a result of this. And it continues to happen. And when they're doling out their ninth booster, and people are still lining up for it. And I don't know how many more ways I can say and just beg and plead with people to please stop getting these injections. They're not going to help. They do nothing but harm. They are all risk, absolutely zero benefit to these shots. We are coming up on a break. We're going to delve back into this story when we get back. America Out Loud Talk Radio plays on the iHeartRadio network. You can also listen on our media player from any web browser anywhere in the world. We have the best in-class apps available on Apple, Android, or Alexa 24/7. Great talk radio. All of our shows go to podcast the following day. You can hear them on apps such as Spotify, Stitcher, Pandora, iHeart Podcasts, and many more. Be sure to subscribe and rate the show on Apple Podcasts for me. Don't forget to check out our online store at americaoutloud.shop, where you can find all of the products that we represent on our network at a discounted rate, including an incredible line of products from Chemical Free Body. Unlike the majority of supplements you'll find on the market today, with Chemical Free Body, you won't have to worry about harmful ingredients, binders, fillers, or flow agents. Their ultra-safe breakthrough nanosilver technology destroys pathogens, balances the microbiome, and boosts immunity. All of these products are proudly made in the USA and are backed by an unheard of double your money back guarantee. I've made a twice daily Green 85 drink part of my routine, which has led to a decrease in belly bloat and an increase in my energy throughout the day. Use promo code OUTLOUD to save 20% off the Healthy Gut Bundle. I'll catch you on the other side of this break. Stay with us.
It's time and this is what
I had gut issues for years and terrible heartburn. Working with a couple of very smart doctors, we created a safe, completely natural solution for the 70% of Americans with gut issues like mine. Go to chemicalfreebody.com/outloud today. Get the Malcolm Healthy Gut Bundle. Reboot your gut and your energy and save 20% on your first order.
Be prepared for the next pandemic with the Contagion Emergency Kit, created by Dr. Peter McCullough, Chief Scientific Officer at the Wellness Company. The kit contains essential medications you need to stay safe. It includes life-saving, low-supply medications that were previously withheld: ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, generic Z-Pak, generic Tamiflu, budesonide, and a free nebulizer. A guidebook is included for safe use in emergencies. At time of purchase, complete a quick intake form. Don't worry, if you use any of the medications, they can be replenished within 2 years. Stay ahead of future emergencies with confidence. Order your Contagion Emergency Kit today by going to twc.health/outloud and use code OUTLOUD for $65 off your first order plus free shipping.
Cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of death and disability. Today's high-stress, on-the-go lifestyle makes it hard to stay heart healthy. Lifestyle changes like exercise and diet are critical, but you can also support your heart with concentrated nutrients. Healthy Cell created Heart and Vascular Health to support 3 aspects of heart health: cholesterol, blood pressure, and triglycerides, with CoQ10, vitamin K2, resveratrol, and soluble fiber. And Healthy Cell's not a pill. It's a patent-pending gel you swallow with ultra-absorption of science-backed ingredients. You would need to take 13 pills to get the same amount of nutrients in each gel pack. And these great-tasting gels come in a small packet. Tear off the top, shoot it down, or mix it in water. Get heart healthy. Go to healthycell.com and use code OUTLOUD for 25% off your first order. healthycell.com, code OUTLOUD for 25% off.
Clean, pure, with premium ingredients. Global Healing's Pure Plant Protein offers 20 grams of protein per scoop, and it's the perfect way to maintain and build lean muscle while indulging yourself. It combines enzymes and probiotics to maximize nutrient absorption, improving digestion and your gut health. Available in vanilla and chocolate flavors, elevate your protein consumption while supporting your overall wellness with Pure Plant Protein. Go to americaoutloud.shop and get 15% off using the code OUTLOUD. Global Healing, giving you the power to take control of your health naturally.
Expert opinions, honest debate, and in-depth investigations are what you've come to expect from americaoutloud.news. We don't shy away from speaking the truth boldly and plainly. All that's missing is the propaganda that has infected legacy and social media. Get the best of down and dirty, wholesome American speak. Now is our time, my fellow Americans. America Out Loud Talk Radio. Liberty and justice for all.
Welcome back to Nurses Out Loud on America Out Loud Talk Radio. I'm your host, Nurse Kimberly Overton. Wherever you're listening from today and whatever you're doing, I thank you for giving me the gift of your time. Be sure to make americaoutloud.news your daily stop for all the latest news and happenings. We all must do our part and share the stories, the articles, the podcasts, and videos so we can help secure America's future. If you're just joining us, I've been talking with marketer and multi-best-selling author, Craig Andrews. Let's jump right back in. Craig, thank you again for being here and sharing your story with us today.
Kimberly, thank you. I'm so thankful for you and others like you that are getting the message out. And, you know, one thing that hit me during the break is it's so easy to fall into the trap of thinking this is behind us.
Right.
And one of my lessons that came actually more than a year after I got out of the hospital was I need to be in charge of my healthcare. I need to be informed. And so, before the break, I told you about this horrible experience with my primary care physician and how I made the decision I was going to leave him within 1 year or about 1 year later. Well, 1 year later, I was back for an annual physical and I was meeting with my PA and I had my blood work done. My creatinine came in at 1.56. And for those who aren't familiar with creatinine is a measure. I know you know, Kimberly, but creatinine is a indirect measure of how well your kidneys are filtering out the waste product of creatine, which fuels your muscles. And my creatinine was 1.56, and she was concerned. She said, well, Craig, let's come back in a few weeks and measure it again. And at the time, I was doing something called Camp Gladiator, which is a outdoor workout format, a little bit of CrossFit. You show up in a parking lot with a mat and a couple hand weights, and they take you through an hour of exercises. And I asked her, I said, is there any chance that's my Camp Gladiator? Because I get a little hypoxic out there. Hypoxic meaning not enough oxygen hitting the body. And she's like, no. You're doing a good thing working out. Keep working out. So that blood work was on December 21st. On January 6th, 2023, I had more blood work done, and it moved from 1.56 to 1.67, which means it got worse. And so I went back to her. I said, are you sure it's not Camp Gladiator? Because I'm pushing it out there. I'm, working out till I puke and, doing all these things. And she said, no, you're absolutely doing the right thing. Keep working out. And I happened to run into another nurse. Just freakishly, I met him at church. It's the only Sunday he'd ever been to my church. And he reached out to the church and said, hey, can I get Craig's cell phone number? And they checked with me, and I said, sure. And he reached out and he said, Craig, I want to talk to you. And so we met at Starbucks and we started talking. And he said, Craig, I think it's Camp Gladiator that's messing you up. And he gave me a paper. It was a scholarly paper that said that ischemia can cause elevated creatinine levels. Well, ischemia, again, for those that aren't in the know, is deprivation of oxygen due to blockage. Hypoxia is deprivation of oxygen, I guess in my case, because my lungs suck. And it showed that that was a problem of elevated creatinine. So I asked my PA again, I said, is there any chance? I said, look, here's this paper. We look at this paper. Is there any chance that Camp Gladiator is causing it? And she said, no, 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 absolutely not. Please keep working out. So on my own initiative, I stopped Camp Gladiator for 3 weeks, 3 or 4 weeks. And then I went back and I got another blood test on February 17th. So about 5 weeks after my prior blood test. And my creatinine dropped. It dropped to 1.5, which was lower than the initial reading of 1.56. And I had already scheduled my appointment with my new doctor. I met with him and I asked him, I said, is this a possible cause? And he said, absolutely. And he gave me a dead simple explanation of how he said, the kidneys, the heart, and the lungs, they kind of work together. You mess up one, it messes up the others. And yes, if you're hypoxic, it's probably hurting your kidneys. Why don't you cut your Camp Gladiator workouts back to 30 minutes? I did that. And on June 2nd, I got another blood test and my creatinine was down to 1.3.
And that's the problem, Craig, is that they don't want to listen. That's what we see happening over and over again. And, I started Remnant Healthcare. Well, I started Remnant Nursing. It's now Remnant Healthcare. And that is the number one thing that we hear from our clients that we see is that they feel like for the first time, somebody is actually listening to them. Because you go into your doctor's appointment, if it lasts 5 to 7 minutes, you're lucky with a provider, and nobody listens. It doesn't matter, how many things, you just annoy them whenever you tell them, or you bring a paper or anything that to back up what the point you're trying to make. It really just infuriates them.
Oh, I had that experience another year later. Mm-hmm. Actually, no, maybe it was the same year. Actually, it was the same year because when my creatinine stayed high, my PA said, well, let's get you an ultrasound to look at your kidneys. And the kidneys looked fine, but they saw something on my bladder. So they referred me to a urologist. And as far as I can tell, this urologist was largely incompetent. But, I met with her once for the referral, which is kind of a crazy visit. I'm like, why don't we just go for, I met with her for 5 minutes. She's like, okay, well, come back and we're going to scope you. And I forget the type of scope it was. It's not fun, but she scoped me and she's like, oh my goodness, I wasn't expecting this. You have calcifications and cysts in your bladder. And she started asking me if I'd had injuries. And I was like, no, but I was catheterized, when I was in my coma. Could that be it? Oh, no, that's not it. And I kept asking her, and she visibly got frustrated with me because I was asking her questions. And, and so we scheduled surgery so that those could be removed and biopsied to make sure it was nothing to worry about. But when we left that appointment, I told my wife, I said, hey, when we get home, will you go on Google and ask Google this question? Can a catheter cause a calcification or, some type of inflammation in the bladder? And number one search result, Cleveland Clinic. Absolutely. Catheterization causes that. It's like, how is it that had an intuitive sense that was a cause? And then backed up by the Cleveland Clinic, yet my urologist, who specialized, obviously, is news to her.
Yeah. They don't like to be questioned. I will tell you that they don't like to be questioned. And honestly, what I see more and more happening is when people come in with these symptoms, and it's all about either, the standard of care is like these prescription medications or surgery or, whatever is going to feed their bottom line, basically. And it's not like without the benefit of having, taking this group of symptoms and putting it in their little, computer or whatever that kind of spits out, this is the drug that you should prescribe for this set of symptoms, or this is the surgical procedure that they should do. But nobody's looking to the root cause of anything. That's
Yeah.
what's so disturbing. And that's why we are in this sick care system, and why so many of us are just chronically dealing with chronic illness, because nobody's getting to the root cause. They don't care. They just
I
want to know
heard
what prescription medication can they put you on, and with no plans to take you off of it.
I heard recently somebody say there's nothing more profitable than a sick kid.
It's true. You got a customer for life.
Yeah.
They're getting them earlier and earlier now. And when we look at the vaccines, and I did not come into this, Craig. I did not come into this anti-vax. I was pro-vaccine. I had my son had all of his vaccines. I had all of my shots. Flu shot. I had all of them. I wasn't anti-vax because I didn't know any better. The only education that we get as nurses: safe, effective, and necessary. That's it.
Yeah.
And I never really looked any deeper into it. And I deal with a lot of shame over that. But I always just assumed that the people that were in charge of that, in that realm, they were doing their due diligence. While they're not. I came to find out about research studies of clinical outcomes in vaccinated versus unvaccinated children. And it was overwhelmingly that the unvaccinated were healthier overall and had better outcomes than their vaccinated peers. And what was really interesting, the instance of autism in the unvaccinated is virtually zero. That's pretty compelling.
I can believe that. I have somebody in my family who went the anti-vax route, and it was funny. For a couple of years when I would visit, I was like, oh geez, I'm going to get an earful. And it would be like 2 hours of anti-vaccine stats, which I loved them. And so I would sit there and listen, but it was just really painful. I was like, why are you telling me I'm past vaccination? And, my wife and I, we're not going to have any more kids, and nobody's going to listen to me about whether or not their kids should get vaccinated or not. And what was so interesting is through my journey, through my 3 months in the hospital, I started seeing things that he had told me come true again and again and again. I was like, oh my goodness. And it, I would say that I'm not, I wouldn't quite take myself to the point of being anti-vax, but I would take myself to the point I don't trust the bastards. I don't trust the people that nearly killed me. And so if they're telling me I should get vaccinated or I should compel someone else's kids to get vaccinated, I'm like, no, I don't trust you.
Yeah. Oh, I actually just started a new job. I wouldn't even let them do a TB skin test on me. I was like, absolutely not. You're not injecting a single thing into my body. I will go take a blood test to prove that I don't have tuberculosis, but I would not even let them come at me with a TB skin test. So I'm definitely leaving the fight anti-vax. I will say that. But I've actually done the research now, and what I found has been compelling and horrific. And to the point where I could never, in good conscience, recommend another vaccine for anyone. But, I want to get more. We don't even have that much time left. I can't believe how quickly this time has gone. But I really want to get into your book that you wrote. You've learned some pretty powerful lessons from your experience, and you do have a marketing company as well. So I want to kind of hear how you have taken these experiences. You talked about, how did you put it? I'm trying to remember.
Lessons from the ledge of death.
Lessons from the ledge of death. Thank you. And how do you incorporate that in your marketing now, or do you?
It's really interesting. If you want to influence people, tell them a story. Yeah. Steve Jobs said that the most powerful person in the world is the storyteller.
Yes.
And so my first move, after leaving the hospital, was to actually write the book. And my wife and I were talking about it, and I said, and I want to be clear, when I say I wrote it, we actually wrote it together. I don't want to take away from what she did, most certainly not. And because actually just a lot of that book is actually her daily journal entries that she posted to Caring Bridge when I was in the hospital. And they're powerful. I mean, they're powerful. They're raw. We intentionally did not edit. We didn't spell correct. We didn't grammar correct. We didn't punctuate correct. We left all the errors in there because the errors tell part of the story, that she was just fatigued beyond measure. And there was one day where in her journal, she actually referred me to it. She said, it slept most of the day. And I got the biggest kick out of that. But that's how tired she was.
Yeah.
But I said, here's my strategy for the book. I said, let's tell a story where we connect with the reader emotionally. And let's make that the front end of the book. And then the back end, once we connect with them emotionally, let's tell them what happened. And so the book's organized in 3 parts. Part 1 is Craig's journey. It tells the story from the day we woke up sick until the day it was lights out for me. And then part 2 is Karen's journey. And she steps back a few days and picks it up from the day that I walked into the hospital until the day I left the hospital. And part 3 is lessons from the journey. And it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable what happened. And there's a chapter in the book called Thanks for the Business. That chapter is titled based off a text message that I got from a senior executive in the healthcare system where I nearly died. And his text message was exactly 4 words: thanks for the business.
Unbelievable.
So, so I approach the book the way I approach other things in marketing. If you want to move people, you need to connect with them. They need to see you as relatable. They need to see themselves in you. And so whether it's writing a book or whether it's helping businesses grow, my job is to create emotional bonds. And we work exclusively with people that have high ticket services with long sales cycles that require a high level of trust. And we get really excited if they're in a commoditized space, meaning there are thousands of people that look substantially similar to them. And so one of the areas we've actually been expanding is into healthcare. Originally, when somebody told me, Craig, you should help some healthcare providers with their marketing, I'm like, no, I want them to go out of business. I think they're evil people.
Yeah.
And he said, Craig, not all of them. Not all of them are evil. And since I set on that journey, I've met people like you, Kimberly. I've met people like Neer Patel. I've met Justin Leader, Matt Ort, Josh Butler. I've met these people who see the problem and they're fixing it. And if I could end my life knowing that I played a role in helping people like you, Josh, Justin, Neer, be more successful, that would be a life well lived.
Exactly. We need that. I'm telling you, we need that. And we're going to have a conversation after this. I can promise you that, Craig. We'll definitely have a conversation because, it is, we're navigating uncharted waters. Many of us are. I came into this and I started with a 501c3. I ended up founding a private membership association, which is a little bit different structure than most people are used to. But, I am an entrepreneur, I guess, but I'm a nurse, right? But all of a sudden I'm having to do my own marketing, my own graphic design work, my, accounts. I have to do everything. So, we're all in uncharted water. So I think leaning on people that have that kind of expertise, it just makes such a difference. And particularly when they're like-minded, because I've had companies, that I've tried to work with in the past, and they've absolutely ghosted me when they found out what I was doing. They
did you a favor. They did you a favor. They saved you a lot of money.
They absolutely did. They absolutely did. I was like, you don't want my money? Okay. It's like, well, I'll just move on. And that's really what it has to be all about, getting these like-minded people together in order to, push all of this forward. That we have to build this new paradigm, and it's going to take all of us coming together and collaborating to do it.
Yeah. And here's the thing. I believe I believe in the American dream.
Yeah.
I believe in the greatness of America. And even though Near is Indian, he came here because, both he and his wife understand that America gives you the chance. If you have a better idea, you have the chance to carry it forward. And that doesn't mean that there's not forces fighting against you. But you know what? The consumer will win.
Yeah.
And our job is to be better consumers and go to the people who are actually representing us, not the big insurance companies, not big pharma, and to use our scarce resources to give our money to those that actually are here to help us.
Absolutely. I could not agree with that sentiment more. I cannot believe we are out of time. I really can't. This went entirely too quickly. I'm going to have you back on. I think there is really so much more that we can talk about. I'm glad that you shared, and thank you for sharing your experience with my listeners. I know that this will resonate with them because so many have been through similar, whether it be them themselves or having lost loved ones. I know that this story will resonate with them. So thank you so much for coming and sharing with me. We will include a link to your book in our show notes. So any of you listening out there, I would highly encourage you to get the book. Hope Never Dies, right?
Hope That Won't Die.
Hope That Won't Die. We're going to get that in our show notes, and we're also going to have them put that up in the America Out Loud bookstore. So you will be able to quickly and easily find that. I'm sure it'll be an amazing read, and I look forward to reading it myself. Craig Andrews, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. It's been a delight.
And that is all the time that we have for today, friends. But remember, we are here on the air 5 days a week, Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern with a different nurse host daily. You can also catch the encore at 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Please be sure to tune in and listen to myself and my amazing sister nurses. As we walk you through all of these hot topics, we will empower you with information and education. We will advocate and we will stand in the gap for you because we are nurses and this is what we do. I'm your host, Nurse Kimberly Overton. You can find me here every Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern. Until next time, be safe, be well, and God bless. Remember, we are in a war for truth. We are putting out a bounty on the real misinformation and exposing the purveyors of propaganda. No topic is off limits as we shine our lights and expose the darkness.